Good morning, Hakeem Group. Yeah, I'm not a head teacher now, but I'm going to make you do that just one more time. Right, good morning, Hakeem Group. Good morning. All right, fantastic. What a lovely venue. Very nice to meet some of the HG staff at breakfast this morning. Very nice to be talking to people as they come in. My name's Alex. I'm a generations speaker, also leadership coach, leadership team coach, and so on. I'll show you a little bit of my background as we go through. You've got your workbooks in front of you. I was very impressed as people came down. Immediately, they were getting handed out around the place. I mean, there's various pages there where I'll refer to it. Might stop for a minute, for you to pause and all the rest of it. But it's there for you to use or not. I'll pause here and there. You can fill bits in or have a chat or not. Whatever is most useful to you. So, the multi-generational workplace. When it came to speaking, I started out talking about the generation of kids who went through the schools I ran. So I was a secondary school head teacher. And what happened was, as they grew up and went into the workplace and so on, I started hearing them refer to in ways that I didn't understand or appreciate. So I started talking about that. And then as time has gone on, and in post-COVID, but also before, the older generations have not only stayed in the workplace, come back into the workplace as well. So there's plenty of workplaces around now where there might be 50 years between the youngest and the oldest. And it's a new issue, or a newer issue. So that's where this material comes in. Now, that QR code there takes you to my website. I've got various blogs, videos, all that kind of stuff. And at the end, I'll have another QR code. You can just download the slides straight away. I'll be around at lunchtime and so on. Please do, connect on LinkedIn if that's your thing. But some people feel comfortable asking a question at the end. And there will be a little Q&A section at the end. Some people want to come up and say hello at lunchtime. And some people just want to send an electronic message. So whichever one of those you prefer to do, please do. If you get home tomorrow, I wish I'd asked that, just contact, no problem at all. So today, this is what I'm going to cover at time before 12 o'clock. What is the generation? Who are they? I'll just say from the outset here, I'm not talking about different species here, right? We're all individuals. I'd always advocate treating people as individuals. It's not something that goes on your passport. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. X, you've had a millennial, or whatever it is. It's not something that's like that. I'll talk you through who they are and what's different it makes in the workplace. Now, in some cases, not a lot. In some cases, a huge amount. And even in the cases of the workplaces where it's not a lot, there's always things that they might be able to make more of. Actually, having a workplace where there's 50 years between youngest and oldest is an incredible resource. And not everyone makes enough of that as they could do. I'll talk about, let me just test this out here. Would you like me to call them the youngest generation in the workplace? And I'll give you years and dates and so on shortly. I'm going to do a show of hands. So it'll be whether you want me to call them Gen Z or Gen Z. Now, some of you might flinch, right? But if I say the thing you don't like the whole way through, at least you know if there was a vote, there was something democratic about it. So put your hand up if you'd rather I call them Gen Z. Hands up. Hands up for the Zs. Hands up for the Zs. Okay, I think it is the Zs. But it does vary, actually, according to industry and which event I go to. People treat it as a bit of an Americanism. I noticed there was some at the back who thought, actually doing saying they were just wanted to see if other people put their hand up first. Okay, so Z it is. And then how you can create a workplace that's harmonious and productive, or more harmonious, more productive. And we'll do a little bit of Q&A at the end. There's at least one roving mic to go around the place. Right, so what are the issues? Age diversity, unprecedented levels. So you might have a 19-year-old intern, and you might be having somebody who's still working into the 70s, so going past 50 years. How to make the most of the opportunities that gives you. Rather than, well, actually, you two people in your 50s, you'll work together. You two people are here, you'll work together. You know, all those kinds of things. How do you get it mixed up? But there's also some challenges there. Challenges around communication in the workplace, beyond the workplace, how technology works, what technology you use, how people communicate with each other out of work and how they don't. What the expectations might be, particularly for the younger generation, about career progression, about what work-life balance they want, all those kinds of things. Now, occasionally, a little orange square will appear in the bottom right where there's something that's relevant in the workbook there. So I'm not expecting everyone to diligently start writing. But just what are the key issues for you? What are the key issues for you? Is it about recruitment and retention? And I would say they're increasingly separate issues. Is it about these two people, they just don't quite work together on anything, I need to keep them apart? Is it that you've got a real imbalance? Is it that you've got a practice of 6 to 8, say 8, half of them 55 plus, half of them 25 minus? I'll just give you a minute just to think about that. And it might be none of the things that I've said. If you're really stuck, I'll do a question off and ask when I'm doing coaching leadership teams. You know, what percentage of your full potential is your practice or practice currently working at? You know, and if it is 60%, you know, what would 80% look like? What would it give you? Some organizations I work with where they're just constantly turning over the younger staff. Constantly. Can't quite seem to find the ones that they really want. Okay, return to those thoughts at the end. All right, so what is the generation? I'm going to be really quick. Generally, people are used to separating time into different chunks. All right, is there a little bit of feedback? Is that just me can hear it? Is that okay? All right, thanks, Bear. So going right back, you know, Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, huge chunks of time that in recent hundreds of years, you know, in this country at least by monarchs, Tudors, Stuarts, Edwardian, Georgian, Victorian, and so on. What I'm going to talk to you about in terms of a generation is roughly 15 years. Roughly 15 years for a generation. So people are generally familiar with the idea of the best singer of a generation, best actor of a generation, best whatever of a generation, saying roughly 15 years. That's enough time for life to have changed, particularly in your upbringing. That's enough time for changes that might be economic, technological, social, political, around 15 years. Now, even within that time, a lot of change will have happened. You know, the pace of life is not slowing down, is it? So even then, 15 years can feel like quite a long time to be comparing upbringings and comparing the attitudes of the youngest generations in the workplace. Right, who are they? Now, I stress, I'm not talking about species here. This is not some scientific outcome we have analysed and seen. And I know you're all going to look to where you are and so on. Silent generation, where children were seen but not heard. The baby boomers. Baby boom after the Second World War. Gen X, the generation that didn't want to be defined. Now, when it comes to generations, these first three were defined in retrospect. My mum was born in 1948, and no one told her at the time, told her mum and dad that, you know, part of the baby boom, this is the baby boom generation. Millennials, where the oldest were due to come of age at the turn of the millennium. No, I'm stepping. What do we think? All right, I'll keep going. Also sometimes called Generation Y, after X. Generation Z, as we're now going to call them. And then we go back round the alphabet again to Alpha. Not that far off, all being born. Now, until we get to millennials, possibly even Z, defined in retrospect, whereas now sort of defined going forwards. And you'll all be thinking where you are, where your staff might be, and so on. Now, in your workbook, you do have a place to put, right, who have you got in your practices, and how many of each have you got? But I'm going to focus on these 4 in particular, because they're generally who you've got in your workplace. Although there is somebody in here who does have someone of a silent generation in the workplace. That definitely came on the stats from Hakeem. Do you want to put your hand up if you've got somebody who's in their 80s still working? You have. Fantastic. How old are they? 80. Fantastic. Anyone else? Where's your practice?
Yeah.
The world is that big. So if we've got a full timeline here with 3 generations in, if you and your siblings were born around there, it's not a guillotine between generations, although there are certain events that make a big difference. I think the generations that I had in school who were coming through after the global financial crash and the years called austerity, I think did experience something different. There are big events that make a difference, but if you or your siblings were born around there, you probably had fairly similar experiences. Fairly similar experiences growing up. But if they say 3 siblings in that time, by the time the younger one comes through school, they say, actually, there was something a bit different about their school. They had some new technology. There was something new for Christmas, which they spent all their time doing, which wasn't around when the older one was there, and so on. But over time, it makes a difference. What should I do? Keep going? Keep going. All right. So if I just go through some key markers, key events that I would argue affected each of those generations the most. I could add the pandemic to that. I would actually argue that the pandemic affected Gen Z the most. There were lots of graduates who came out of university with a job, suddenly without a workplace to do it in, or even a job to go to. There was an awful lot of last in, first out going on when it came to that period of time. If you just follow your way through, you see technology changes, key global events make a difference. I was born in 1972. My mother's big fear for me was that I would have to go and fight. Because I know I'm quite a big lad and that, but trust me, I wouldn't be very good at it. Right? It's not just the idea of it happening, but also not succeeding. And that's not generally a fear I have generation below me. But just was around when you were a kid. I remember Mum and Dad saying, yeah, he just plugs it in and switches it on and starts it. Whereas their view of electricity in the house was something, was a lot more deeply respected than me just turning something on. And all of these things affect how people look at the workplace. Affects their attitudes coming into work. So you'll have your own answer to that question. You'll have your own answer to that question and think, well, actually, having people of different ages, it works really quite well for us. Doesn't make a big difference. But I'd also say that if you find you've got the same people talking to each other who work together all the time, if you've got turnover of staff in their 20s happening a lot, and if there's things that you don't talk about as a workplace that you think really you should, then there is more you can make of it. Now I'm going to go through, and I sort of hesitate a bit to do this, something for each of the 4 generations. And the first thing I said, just really beware of stereotypes, and I'm going to give you stereotypes. You might look at it and think, well, actually, I don't recognize anything of that of me, people I know, people in the workplace, and so on. Hopefully, you'll recognize something or hearing something. And again, there's something here in the workbook as well. If there's one thing in particular you want to remember, then please do note it down. But beware of stereotypes. I'm giving you stereotypes. Generation on a slide is always going to do that. The differences between people of the same generation can be at least, or often are at least, as those from other generations. So you might have 5 members of staff all in the 40s. They might all be early 40s, a millennial technically, but it might all be incredibly different. So again, I'm very wary of people being put into boxes or feeling like they're being put into boxes. Also, the idea of generations confusing that with people in different stages of life. So if you're, by the time you get to 60 years old, your outlook has probably changed by the time since you were 30. Things have happened. You've looked after the generation above, generation below, all those kinds of things. Those of you who are parents, I know that changed me. It may well have changed you. Experience of life and all the rest of it. I'm not talking about comparing someone who's in their 60s at any point with someone in their 30s at any point. People who were 45 in 1994, 2004, 2014, 2024, on average, may have different outlooks on life according to their experience over time. All right, so baby boomer. Quite work-centric, quite career-focused, post-war, let's build something. Might be long hours. Might be a high level of loyalty to the one employer who expected them to be their employer throughout their life. Job for life. Once employed, right, that's it. Don't have to worry about that again. I'll move my way through the organization, whatever the ranks, whatever the organization chart might be. Quite self-sufficient about it. Yeah, I'll solve my own problems, work this through. It's not about quick fixes. Right, let's have some long-term goals. Get the mortgage, pay it off, build way through, all that kind of stuff. Not expecting huge amounts of change in life. People not necessarily having to expect the kinds of headlines that Imran put up before about, well, this person buy out and that person buy out and so on. But venture capital wasn't necessarily around in the same format when these were coming through the workplace. Loyal, quite traditional views on family, maybe about hierarchy, maybe about authority. And the youngest baby boomers now, 60. Gen X, so I fall pretty much right in the middle of that. Bit more independent. Latchkey kids. More likely to have mum and dad working, come home from school, need a key because there's nobody in. More likely for that to happen. More likely to have both parents out working. Technologically adaptable. I don't know if I always feel that way these days. But I think back then that was the case a little bit more. Particularly if you start your working life in analog and have to translate into digital. Otherwise, a lot of work opportunities disappear with it. But, quite focused on what the outcome might be. There wasn't a 2-minute YouTube video for everything, or several versions of the same thing. You have to work it out yourself a little bit. A bit less deferential, a bit less, there'll only be one employer, look up to that and so on. People have experienced a few recessions, a few redundancies, all those kinds of things. And a little bit of work-life balance coming in. I have to say I don't always remember it. But not quite. I'm going to be at the office till 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock. It's a competition. A bit less of that. Gets the millennials, really quite tech-savvy. So even the oldest ones growing up with phones, not necessarily smartphones. Believe it or not, there was a time when the Nokia 3310 that my daughter looks at disgust every morning that she has to take for school was considered quite whizzy technology. Woo! We all went. Expect to be a bit more mobile in the career if I want. I could work abroad. I could work here. There's a branch of the office there. I could go there. If not, I'll go find somewhere else. Actually, work needs to fit into the life rather than life having to fit into the work. Now, again, you might be looking at this thinking, actually, I just don't recognize any of that in me. You might recognize something. You might recognize something in your peers and your friends. Quite team-orientated, less about a big organisation chart, wanting more of a flat structure, wanting to collaborate a bit more. Right, why do we have to have one of these, or one of these, or one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these in the workplace? Why does it have to be, why are people so obsessed with status that are older than me? Something a little flatter. And then the Zs. The purpose of the job really mattering. Really mattering. Values matter. I talked about Gen Z to group people who are private banks. They manage quite high net worth individuals. They've all got a website with a black background and the word integrity in massive white letters. I said, you're not fooling the younger generation with that. You're going to have to do a little bit better. Have to do a little bit more with it. Digital natives, they've grown up with it. It's all they've known. All they've known. My daughter's 13. Her first word was Netflix. Inclusive spaces matter. Diversity matters because they are more diverse. At the last census, the average age of a white Brit was 41. The average age of someone from a mixed background was 19, and they are the fastest growing. The country is changing. Mental health awareness, massive. I think my generation should have been a bit more aware of it too. I think of my friends who always had to go back at last orders, always had to have an extra pint, always had to go on somewhere else. There was actually something there that they weren't talking about. 30 years on, I can see it. But that flexibility also matters. Now, desire for flexibility doesn't mean, completely flexible. In the course of this work, I worked with an organisation where the whole lot were Gen Z. And the guy ran it super clear. Sometimes I'm going to ask you to work to 8 p.m. and that's it. Don't argue. Yes, you'll get a pay rise of 3 to 5% every year. Yes, most years I'll take to Mexico, whatever it is for something. But when I need you, I need you. And that's what he says on recruitment. People know what the deal is before they turn up. And a lot of the reasons things go wrong with the younger generation is they don't know what the deal is going to be before they come. And sometimes I talk to organisations saying we just can't find young staff. When we find them, we don't understand them. We can't keep them. And this is what they do. A lot of the time I say, I think you just appointed the wrong people. And what you need to look at is your own recruitment processes. Because if you're recruiting the same way as you were 10 years ago, then you're probably not going to get what you want. And you're going to be in high turnover area. Now, just give you a minute, just on your tables, if there's something from each of those four, just have a chat about what your issues are about being a harmonious, productive workplace. Just have a little chat. I'll bring you back in a minute or two. What have you got? What's on your mind? What are you talking about? So it was really interesting that as soon as I said share what's on your mind, every table just burst into volume. Every table burst into volume. So there's clearly things that are hovering. And as I say, I'm going to be around later. You can connect with me and ask me anything you like later as well if things occur. If I can't answer the question, I'll say, but I'll try. Because each of your practices will be different. Now, across the key, that's what it looks like. Notice that the Zs are almost more than the baby boomers. Sometimes they say, you mean they're not just in the workplace, but there's actually quite a lot of them, increasingly so. Increasingly so. So a typical, if there is such a thing, a typical practice of 8, probably got 1 boomer, 3 Gen X, 3 millennials, and 1 Gen Z. Has anyone got exactly that? Okay, 1 or 2. But you'll have some mix. You'll have some mix. And if you're constantly having to recruit new ones at the bottom and suddenly there's 5 in your practice rather than 6 or 7 rather than 8 for a month or 2, it does impact on people's workloads. It's definitely an issue. When it comes to practice managers, Gen Z's starting to be the managers as well. At the moment, only 0.5%, but I would guess that figure will double for each year of the next 5 years. Something like that. Possibly more. And one of the issues that a lot of the employers, I'll talk about generations to people from all kinds of different backgrounds. A common issue that's coming up is, well, we've managed to find them, but now we've found them, they're not interested in moving up. Succession planning is becoming a real issue. And that's everywhere. So I'm talking here people, practices of 6 or 8 people. If I talk to the employers that have got hundreds or thousands, they're finding the same problem. We've got people in and they're doing well and all the rest of it. They're not interested in more responsibility. I'll try and explain why I think that is in a minute. But there's one issue that summarizes things. So I know if you're right at the back, you might not be able to read what's on the slide. So you've got 5 sets of bars. And you've got age groups, 18 to 29, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60 plus. Purple from each generation. Employees should only do the work they are paid for, no more, no less. And there's almost twice as many in the 18 to 29 as there is 60 plus. If there's one issue that keeps coming back and back and back and back, it's this. I see it in schools as well. Are you all in it for the kids? Yes, we are, but not after 3:31. This is a real common issue. I dare say some of you wrote this down. But in terms of the older generation being in the workplace, it's changed dramatically over time. It's more than doubled in a couple of decades. So as pension ages go up, that's part of it. And actually, post-COVID, there was a lot of talk about people coming back into the workplace and so on, but the increase started a long time before. And I think this is only going to keep going. I talked to a lot of people that said, oh, my child A, child B only managed to get a place because of the bank of mum and dad. Or generally, the bank of mum and dad only exists if they managed to have a mortgage in the first place, if they bought. There is no bank of mum and dad if they're renting and have no prospect of ever buying, and increasingly people feeling they have no prospect of ever retiring. These numbers are going to go up and up and up. I can see in the years to come, I would talk to your audiences and say, yeah, you've got 60 years between your youngest and oldest. Now, it's true that since the global financial crash and so on, that's gone up and up, but I don't think it's just about that. And employees doesn't mean full-time either. And a lot of people want to talk to me about the flexibility that their 25-year-old member of staff wants. They don't talk to me so much about what their 65 member of staff wants, or one is seen as a bigger problem more than the other. Let's talk a little bit about Gen Z, the youngest generation in your workplace. Again, you've got a little spot in your workbook for this, if you want. Now, looking at fast being a quarter of the UK workforce, the available UK workforce. Not quite the same as they're in it. But you're talking about 10 million. 10 million in total. At the last census, about 3.3 million aged between 22 and 27, 3.3 million, 17, 22, and so on and so on. So large numbers, and that's within a growing population. So at the moment, in some of your practices, there might be the smallest generation represented. It won't be long, I suspect, before they're the second largest or even the largest. Some key issues. These are not going to be any surprise to you. So recruitment, finding them, a big issue. Retention, a big issue. Understanding where they're coming from, a big issue. Succession planning, a big issue. And one of the challenges, right, so me, someone in the 50s, when I talk to audiences of people, around that age, younger or older, one of the big challenges is that the younger generation doesn't need us. They don't need us in the same way. My generation operated under the idea that somebody 20 to 30 years older than us would give us our first job. Now, not necessarily true. There's 250,000 Gen Z listed as a director at Companies House. They've got their own thing. Now, a lot of the time, it's not their main job. It might be the side job. It might be the side hustle. But it's not hard if you're sitting with a group of friends at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning. Do you know what? We could do that. That might be a business. We might be able to make a bit of money doing that. 13 quid, Companies House, register it. Go to Wix or Squarespace or whatever, set up a website. By the end of the first week, you made your first sale. Next Saturday morning, well, that went well. I also thought about this. Maybe that could be another business. Do it again. I find a lot of people my age find that quite threatening. Now, whether it's a sustainable income or not is something else. Whether you can grow it or not is something else. But this is partly why recruitment is harder, because there are options out there. All right, now that's me. Probably more years ago than I care to remember now. Secondary school head teacher in Tottenham, North London. And I show that photo a lot, partly because there weren't that many photos taken at the time. There was no Instagram to have an account with and all the rest of it. And what I remembered was a bunch of smart, ambitious, totally up for it kids. Took advantage of every opportunity going, and we put plenty in front of them. So when I found them being described as snowflakes or lazy or entitled or whatever it was out in the workplace, including from my peers and friends, I thought, okay, there's something here that's just not quite carrying through. And I started to see headlines like this. These are genuine headlines. Gen Z workers, terrifying bosses with woke demand. Others allocate tasks to their bosses. They want paid time off for anxiety. Just imagine paid time off for illness. When I was younger, they were called hangovers. The rise of social media has turned university students into snowflakes. They just melt straight away, can't take anything. It's difficult to work with Gen Z. They're so easily offended. You don't know what to say. Don't know what you can talk about or not. And recently, here's something from the Telegraph. A nightmare. They're barely able to get through the interview. They can't pick up the phone. They ghost their new company. They get a job, sign the contract, and then not show up. We'd book interviews, but people wouldn't turn up, or they'd turn up late, or they'd turn up wildly unprepared. All right, I'm not going to be able to solve all this for you in the time that I have. Part of the issue is hard to recruit them, is there are fewer of them. So if the youngest of young professionals are at about the year of birth 2003, for the last 8 years, birth rates went down. And birth rates are going down again now, and going down and down and down. Real implications for the future of the country, actually, I would say. Who's going to be coming through and earning to pay the taxes, to pay the pensions, to pay the whatever it is. So there's the oldest Gen Z. There's the current young professionals, only now starting to go back up the other way. There's the current secondary school population, and there's the current primary school population. This is why the cities where primary schools are closing, because the kids aren't there. So a couple of key characteristics. And my website talk about 7. I've chosen 2 share with you today. All right, first of all, I'm going to talk about diligent. Now, people look at me and say, what? Really? Working hard and they don't want to work the extra hours and all the rest of it? The percentage of first-class degrees doubled over the course of the 2010s. Now, you could argue and say, well, universities need their statistics and they're paid all this money on all those kinds of things. Compared to what I see now, I pretty much had a 4-year state-sponsored party in Manchester in the early 90s. Lectures, voluntary, deadlines, movable. Always used to say, the biggest problem in education is that adults forget their own childhoods. And forget what they were like when they were young and all those kinds of things. There was certainly a moment where I saw it change, where there were kids wanting to stay till 4, 5, 6 o'clock to do extra revision and intervention, where they wanted to come in on Saturday morning, where you couldn't set enough homework for them. Now, whether it was because the messages about globalization cut through, or whatever it was, it shifted. I could show you something similar with GCSEs. I could show you something similar with A-levels. Now, my generation, for what I saw in terms of the university years, did not work anything like as hard as the young ones do now. And we weren't coming out with the same debt as they are. We weren't having to work the same number of hours in evening jobs and weekend jobs as they were. You know, if you go to the average school now and see how hard they're working compared to how I saw a lot of my own childhood and my friend's own childhood, it's a lot more. The key for you as employers is how you find them. Now, here's a survey from The Economist a few years ago, all Gen Z answering this. What matters most to you? Get good grades by a mile. By a mile. Not some of the other things a little bit further down the list, which might have been high priorities for some as teenagers. They're out there. It's about you finding them. And a lot of employers don't necessarily want to cast the net widely enough. They don't want to advertise online in the same way. I'm not going to put myself up as a recruitment expert and you must go on this website and all those different kinds of things. But I do know that those who succeed cast the net wide and they are super, super clear about exactly what they're looking for. Even to the point where you think you might put some people off. But I'd say in this day and age, you've got to be more Marmite, not less. Be absolutely clear about what you want. The people looking for it are more likely to find you. Get good grades by a mile. Recent survey, would you work nights and weekends for higher pay? Now, I get these are people at different stages of life and they might not have kids and those other responsibilities and so on. But the propensity to work isn't there. Is there. What they can buy with it, in terms of property and bills and all those kinds of things. My generation used to talk about dead money. You know, oh, why are you still renting? It's dead money. You need to get that saved. Now the chances, you know, what you need for a deposit in whatever part of the country that you've come from. You know, I'm from South Yorkshire. You know, I live in London. I can see a disparity between those two things. But even from where I'm from, you know, it'd be difficult to save up and buy. Which is partly why they're not prepared to work the hours, because like, well, where's the fair deal? You know, what I get when I talk to the younger generation, like that photo I put up, you know, focus groups and so on, they say things to me like, were you aware that climate change was a problem or was going to be a problem when you were at school? Were you taught about it? Well, yeah, we were actually. So what have you done about it? And then the answer is, well, actually, tell you what, you back away from the area, we'll take it from here. They see that the deal that they've inherited from the older generations is not fair and is different from the one that their own parents inherited. So briefly, that was on diligence. Secondly, apprehensive. Sorry, I know I'm making you work on the camera. All right. If you've grown up with one of these, or access to one of these, you've also been dealing with 24/7 reputation management from a very young age. I am delighted that my teens and early 20s are not on social media. Delighted. I'm not claiming I was this, that, or the other, but you could just sort of live, make your mistakes, whatever it is. There's no imprint. Nothing coming back to you. Whereas if all you've known is that, and there's the expectation of having that, and social media, TikTok's less than 10 years old. You wouldn't necessarily know that. And a lot of Gen Z uses it as a search engine, more than Google actually. Not just about the funny videos. But the reason they're interested in mental health problems is because the mental health is off the scale. Problems are off the scale. I'm not just talking about people saying that they feel anxious or feeling a bit depressed. I'm talking about self-harm hospitalizations. I say a bit more risk-averse. They tend to get a bit offended when I say that. But, anyone get lost coming here today? You might have thought, I'm stuck in traffic, but you knew how long, didn't you? And you had a choice of routes. A lot of risk has been designed out of life. And if I think back, 30 years ago, you're going to go away with this summer, well, I've saved a bit of money. I'll go down the local bookshop. That Lonely Planet looks good. Right, how much is that? 3 weeks, see ya. No walking blue dart, no whatever. Now, that would be seen, I think, as really quite risky. But it also meant you had a chance to learn your own experiences and learn from your mistakes, or not have the option of going to a 60-second YouTube video or to somewhere online every time something went wrong. The impact of social media has been massive. And I know that from when I was ahead and phones were starting to be a thing, as teachers, we were clueless. Same with parents getting their kid a phone, having no idea of the power of this thing. That's had really quite a big impact on childhoods. I'm told that there's a lot more online dating options these days. It hasn't necessarily led to people being more truthful online. Despite all that, fewer romantic relationships, fewer physical workplaces to learn soft skills, which is an opportunity for you, I think, is a physical workplace. Gen Z were first back at the office after COVID. And if you had 5 of you living in a 2-bedroom flat, trying to find somewhere to work and doing work calls, sitting on your bed with a laptop, no wonder you wanted to go back to somewhere where you could operate a bit more. Let's go to that same survey. How much, if at all, are each of these a problem amongst people your age in your community? Again, anxiety and depression off the scale. They've done less work experience than previous generations. A lot of the time, because they've been at school till late, or Saturday morning this, whatever it is. And for those that might have been earning, if you're buying and selling vintage clothes online, say, and making money doing that, well, you might have had an income, but you've not been in a workplace, sharing experiences and working alongside people 10, 20, 30, 40 years older than you. They're coming in to the workplace at a deficit in terms of that experience compared to older generations. I've seen some recent 2023 figures and they continue to go up. There might have been a leap in the percentage of children and young people with a probable mental disorder. And the same is true if you're looking at, not just people going to the doctor and saying, well, I think there's this. I'm talking about diagnoses. The numbers continue to rise. That is the context for a lot of the young people coming into your workplaces. And for an awful lot of them, an organisation that doesn't take that seriously is a complete red line. They expect that to be taken seriously. It's one of the main reasons they find somewhere else to go. It's not just them, though, who are not in the economy because of ill health. Those numbers went up as a result of COVID and have kept going up. There's an awful lot not in the workplace who could be. There's an awful lot of economic growth being left out on the floor. All right, so some key characteristics there. I've talked about a couple. There's more again on the website if you want to look at that. Ask me about that, videos and stuff as well. Right, let's get into solutions or maybe tips. So I'm going to go through a bunch of these. We're going through to a little Q&A. Actually, I'm just going to stop there. In your workbook, you have got something about Gen Z in your workplace. A couple of things. Let's just have another couple of minutes on your table. Have a breather, fill your drink. Just talk about what you've got. I love how the noise just explodes when you start as well. It's really great. So call these solutions. I think they're more tips. I'm not going to advertise anything as a magic bullet. But hopefully if today a chance to reflect a little bit on what you've got and what you might do with it. So solution 1, clear expectations and values. In other words, what needs to be the same for everybody? Or sometimes I talk to employers and they say, well, do you know what? The people I've got, they're just too different to have that. They're just too different. They've got all these different experiences, backgrounds, to have lots of things that are the same. It's really hard, so therefore we don't. Actually, do you know what? The more diverse it is in terms of age, the more important it is to have that. What must everybody have in common in your practice or practices? Now, I'm sure you get a lot of help with that from the central team as well. Is it about having an inclusive ethos? And if so, what is it? Could the people in the practice all explain what that is? A lot of organisations I talk to, they tell me about the values behind the wall in reception, and there they end. Because it's not what their employees talk to me about. Is it about mutual respect? What are the shared goals, the core values? What are the non-negotiables? What are the things about how they do things? Now, the trouble is when you start this kind of exercise, it can go on for a long time, and actually there's a bit of less is more here. There's a bit of less is more. Yeah. But what's no good is if it's only you that can say what they are. They need to say it. Because a lot of how you can resolve recruitment issues in this day and age-old way of doing it is by the word of mouth. And your young employees in particular, but not just them, will be sharing their experiences. And publicly. It will, go online, go on sites like Glassdoor or whatever it is. So what must everybody have in common? That they can reel back to you. If I went to any of your practices, what is this one about? Can they say? I'll keep going. Right, diversity is an asset. Well, of course it is. I mean, you all know that. A lot of the time it's talked about in terms of some or all of those three things. From my own professional career, that school in Tottenham, I think between them the kids spoke something like 55 different languages, very mixed part of town, and that wasn't unusual there. So if diversity is not an asset to you there, and also from my perspective, trying to make sure that the staff look like the kids, you bring a lot of experience and a lot of ideas into the room. Rarely do we talk about diversity of thought, just how people see the world. All too rarely do we ask people to bring their experience from outside work into work. And yet a lot of answers to the problems you might have or where the next phase of development for your individual practice might be can lie with the employees. But for a lot of time, unless you ask them, they might not give it. How you use the very most of all that you have. Some of you might be in practices where everyone's a similar age and they've all got the same kind of background, but I'm guessing maybe not. I'm guessing there's a mix. If you've always got the same two people who work together on everything, we work best together. It's like school, isn't it? We work best together. Me and my friend, we always work well together here. Mix people up. Ask them to solve the problems together. Why is it that this time of year, this time of week is always dead? Why is it that this new range isn't shifting? Why is it we manage to sell to these people, not those people? But I'd also say it's not just the person in charge who needs to know all their colleagues well. Everybody needs to know each other. Make sure you ask around the room. Make sure you share the airtime amongst them. Now, I do this a lot with leadership teams and organisations, which is a different kind of thing to what you're doing. Well, so how many ways can the team meet? So if a team of 4 meeting as a pair, 6 different ways in which they can do it. And that goes up and up and up. But that's just as a 2. A lot of the time, teams meet in 2 ways. They meet as pairs or everybody together. Not necessarily the 3s and 4s and so on in between. Because when you start taking all those into account, it goes up more and more and more and more. I did work with a leadership team last week. It was 13 people. It's over 8,000 ways in which they can meet. Every 2, every 3, every 4, every 5, every 6, every 7, etc. Part of making the most of the team that you have is to get different people working together on different things and making sure that they're talking and thinking these things through. Because often it's the same 2 people here, the same 2 people here, and maybe everybody together, and everyone's together. Maybe some people contribute, and maybe they don't. The ones who have least to say verbally are often the ones who've got the most interesting things to say. Just need to ask them. Mentoring cuts both ways. Our traditional view of mentoring, somebody older and more senior teaches something, somebody who's younger. Reverse mentoring can be very powerful. What can the 25-year-old in your practice teach the 55-year-old? Now, typically, that comes down to technology. This is how you use this on your phone. This is how you download that. This is how you connect to this. This is how I change your settings on that. All those kind of things. But it won't just be that. If you asked around, what can the younger people in your practice teach the older ones? And once you've got learning flowing both ways and across the practice, suddenly a lot of possibilities open up. And maybe not just once either. Somebody over time, there's a lot of learning that can be gained flowing across the practice rather than always having to come from the person at the top to people down. 4, communication boundaries. Often a need for this. Now, many, many ways in which people can communicate these days. How email works. Still, a lot of organisations need some ground rules about how blind copying operates. Still, a lot of organisations can struggle with what confidentiality means. Some people I've worked with, the idea of confidentiality is only telling one person at a time. This is confidential, but how do WhatsApp groups work? Can everyone in the practice access them? Or is there something where everyone's on apart from one? The language that might be used, and I'm sure within the practice quite clear on that, but each generation's got its own slang, got its own words and phrases that it might use. Unless everyone can understand it, then maybe nobody says it. That's one of the things that organisations can have in common. Everyone has a responsibility to make sure that they can be understood by others. And you judge communication by how it's received, not by how well you think you said it. And unless you start asking, you might find, actually, that's why that communication, that doesn't work. That's why that person doesn't often work with that person. All those different kinds of things. Because how this works inside and outside of work can really matter. And finally, it's about social time. Time when they're not working, it might be a break, might be lunch, might be before, might be after, might be the weekend, or whatever it is. Now, I would say that someone from my own generation's idea of what an inclusive space is may not be the same as somebody half my age. And it's always worth asking. What music gets played? If there's a social room, what you have around you, what gets said in the staff room, where people go for lunch, the food that people bring back in. If it's after work socialising, where do you go? I met somebody whose client, He runs an organisation where they do archiving, so people bring in boxes of photographs. Please make that electronic. He had somebody work with him, a 22-year-old lad, guy, came to work with him for a week. At the end of the week, say your week's gone really well. Let's go to the pub. I'll buy you a drink. And it was only after they'd been in the pub about half an hour that he realised this guy had never been in a pub before. He had no idea how to order a drink. It had actually taken him into an area where he felt really quite unsure. The younger generation drink alcohol a lot less than old generation, smoke a lot less. I used to say the millennials were the first generation to be better behaved than the one before. I think that has continued. Work outings, where is it? To where? For how long? All those kinds of things. If everyone can't go, then find somewhere else. So 5 solutions, 5 tips, but you'll all have your own things. You'll all have your own things and your own practices. And there is a new workbook. Spark does something about for the next 2 weeks, if there's 1 thing, 2 things, whatever. And by the way, do contact me to say, this is what we did. Because what you found that worked or something might be something I can pass on to someone in another industry. Something that works for them. So that's what covered today. And if you want a copy of the slides, there's a QR code there. You just have to put your name and email address in, and it will just be, hopefully, sent straight to you. A link and so on to other resources as well. I'll just move out of the way so you can do that. I'll have a minute or two for questions in a sec. But while you're accessing that, I would say there's no workplace that can be more harmonious, more productive, more interesting to be a part of, and more rewarding, and to use the word that I see all over the Hakeem website, happy, than a multi-generational workplace. Hope that you've got at least something to take away from today that you found interesting, but otherwise, thank you very much for listening. Now, we've got at least 1 roving mic, so if anyone wants to be brave, we've got a few minutes for questions. I'll do my best. Either be brave or find someone who's going to ask a question. I suppose out and about. Any hands in the air? Sometimes I get loads, sometimes not a lot. Awesome, thank you so much. If you want to just say your name and where your practice is, ask a question, and we'll go from there.
It's Gavin, and Worcester, Gloucestershire is my practices. So, you said, and I've noticed that the younger generation are more inclusive. They have let go of the older generation's idea of we respect our elders because everyone is equal, and something I really like. And yet bullying is on the rise as well, which is not inclusive. And that's something I'm just trying to get my head around. Any thoughts or insights into that?
Bullying on the rise in workplaces per se? Is that what you're saying?
No, just especially at schools, actually.
I think, my daughter's school, for example, are just introducing these yonder pockets. I don't know if you've seen those. Sometimes you might go to a concert and not take photos, so the phone goes in that, it's done, and it's away. So you don't have certain kids whose day is ruined by they see something on a group chat and lunchtime and all the rest of it. In terms of bullying, I think kids are made more aware than ever before of what their rights might be and where the place might be to raise something. I would also say that the issues with recruitment and retention in schools have also led to schools having to appoint that they'd rather not have, who may not have the same level of control, and that can also come to incidents as well. But the forums, I'm just going to keep moving, the forums for people to, for bullying to actually happen is far more than it ever was. Because it can go on 24/7 now. We badly need the online safety bill to go through, because I think they'll have some kind of protection. Instagram had something last week. They're going to increase their protections for rights, for what parents have got and kids and all those kinds of things, which felt to me a small step in the right direction, but I'd like to see a lot more of it. Because there's a lot of social media companies making large amounts of money from having kids on their platforms who are not old enough compared to what they even should have. It's causing a lot of misery, and they're making quite a lot of money from it. So I think, in general, in terms of them being kinder and so on, Twitter, I think for a lot of the younger generation, is where middle-aged people shout at each other. Instagram is a kinder space to be. The same can be true of Snapchat and all those kinds of things. So I'd say that if you want to cause a problem, it's easier to cause a sustained one now. I don't necessarily find that typical of people's behaviour in the real world beyond the phones. But thank you for the question. Have we got time for another? Thank you. The practice has a number of young people, and it can be hard to persuade them to take on more responsibility. I say part of that is because a lot of risk being designed out of life. I was fortunate in my schooling. I had a lot of opportunities, and what it gave me was the opportunity to think I might be barely adequate at something I was naturally not very good at. So therefore, I could give anything a go because I might be able to do it, and that confidence from it. I don't think the younger generation has that so much. So what I say is, onboarding really matters. It has to be longer in terms of them coming in to be prepared, really assured, secure, and all those kinds of things. And preparation to move up, giving them those opportunities, not even with a loaded, you will be moving up, or we expect you have the ambition to. Make sure the learning opportunities, in order for them to do so, are available right from the start. I think the model that I had, right, here's some extra responsibility, go and do this. Do you know anything about it? No. Off you go, work it out for yourself, you'll be fine. I think that generates quite a lot of that these days. And in a world where there's an awful lot of five-star culture, if you don't give something 5 stars, that's considered to be reputation management issue in themselves. The idea of managing somebody else, particularly somebody older than you, which I think is increasingly the case across HG, they can find that really, really terrifying and therefore back away. Whereas I think they need a longer run-up to it, more than we might think is reasonable. Okay. One more. All done? All done. All done. Right, well, look, I'll be around at lunchtime and so on. You've been a really lovely audience. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you.